grape juice container, all these things that we carry around. A mask I'm not going to need for a moment. And oh, goodness. You'd think after being vaccinated twice over a month ago, all the different things, tested Friday, and of course I'm negative, but that'd be cute, right? And I'm positive. I'm such a positive guy. I just love this stuff. All right, no, I am negative. Mark chapter 8, we're going to be in a moment. It's the very center of the book. And so in the center of the book, this discussion is going to come up that we're going to look at here in a moment. It's the discussion between the disciples and Jesus, and he's going to talk about who he is and all of that. And so we'll get there in a moment. Just a couple of things. Scoot the money over. I'm not too sure about preaching with money at my feet. It's a little strange, but okay. So a couple of announcements. One is, if you're watching us on the live stream, I hope it works. I hope you can actually hear me. We've had it's like our sound's been going out for several months, and we just now figured it out like Thursday, I think it was, Jimmy and I, and we had to replace an entire computer and do all kinds of stuff. But hopefully the sound is actually working. And Devin just checked a few minutes ago. He's a multitasker. While he's leading singing, he's checking also, and it was good at that point. And so we'll see here as we go forward for the Sundays. Also, just a heads up on things that are going around here at the building. You know, for the last couple of months, years, however long we've been involved in this pandemic thing, right? All of us know that it's a huge stress, right, on all of our lives. And at work, of course, many companies, right? Some companies have folded, and just all the different things that have happened throughout this endeavor. And it's not over with, of course. But here at the building, we have about 50 members of the church, that work during the week here at the building with all the different things, church-related things, Hope Light, all the stuff we do here. And of course, like all places, it's very stressful. And over this last month, we've added this layer of an entire vaccine clinic on top of everything else. And so it's been a pretty stressful time for everyone concerned. And so I'm just giving just a quick, wow, we have some great staff, just really hardworking here during the week. And I just wanted to mention that and for a reason too. And so we'll get to that here in a moment. But, speaking of vaccines, I know this week, I'm not going to mention names, of course, all the HIPAA stuff, but, we had a couple of folks come in the building that were born in 1929 that received their vaccines. And I started thinking about that. Wow, 1929. That was like the stock market crash. It's way before World War II. It's like, the whole 20s had just happened. And it's like, it's not a lifetime ago. It's like lifetimes ago, right? That you think about that. And here they are. I don't even know how old they'd be. They'd be old, right? It's old, right? It's like, what is that? It's 71, 91 years old, right? And so you just think, wow, they were barely past the Spanish flu, and now they're getting the COVID vaccine. That's just amazing. Just amazing how God's at work and people live their lives and how we're blessed in so many ways. But I say all of that. But I also mention staff because, like all of you that are working at different places, right? It's stressful times. But I just wanted to highlight our staff here. This week, I was informed here towards the end of the week that we had received about a $70,000 grant. And it's one of those great grants where they're like, here's $70,000, no strings attached, no reporting, nothing. They just simply said, wow, you guys are really doing a good job. It's like a national thing, and they just picked places that were really doing a good job of giving out vaccines and just all the different things when it comes to safety net clinics. Hopefully that wasn't the computer going out just then. And so it's just a part of it. That's what the staff do their thing, and of course we get recognized for that. And so I think that's a great thing. And of course, it's always helpful, right? Pays salaries and does all the stuff that we do during the week. And so that came in on Thursday also. All right, here we go with our sermon. We've got a few minutes here to look at Mark chapter 8 and this great discussion right in the middle of the book. And so that static is probably me because I'm holding it like this. I've got to stop it. All right, there we go. And so Mark chapter 8. So a couple of things have happened. Let's get the big picture again that we've skipped over. We talked about last week how it's about our hearts. It's not externals, it's the heart that matters. And he like takes out unclean spirit, and we've looked at Syrophoenician faith and different people's faith, and then he's going to feed the 4,000. And of course, the disciples still don't get it. Jesus is like, why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not see or understand still? Jesus is just perplexed. He's like, I've been doing all of these miracles and you still don't understand that I am the bread of life. Surely I can make some bread to feed people if I'm the actual bread of life. Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And then he broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000. And how many baskets did I have left over? I'm not just the God who creates. I'm the God that creates in abundance. And so that all happens at the beginning of the chapter. And then he's going to have to heal a blind man. And then after healing the blind man, we get to verse 27. And so Jesus went out along with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he questioned his disciples, saying to them, who do people say that I am? So this is this place where Jesus has this discussion with the disciples, and he very plainly tells them, this is who I am, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to die on the cross, and then I'll be resurrected, and I'm going to shed my blood, and it's a very shameful thing, and that's just the way it has to be. And so this discussion of who is Jesus is so important. Who is he? And so it's like this back and forth deal that we have, right? It's like, do we have the real Jesus or do we make him into this fake Jesus? How does the world see Jesus? Do they see the real Jesus or do they create the fake Jesus? We hear it all the time. Well, if Jesus is around, this is what he'd be believing. This is what he'd be doing. And you're like, I don't think you should talk like that because I don't think Jesus would do what we expect him to do. Is he the real Jesus or is he just a counterfeit? Is he the real Messiah that they are expecting or do they look for another? And so like the disciples, we are all in this process of trying to figure out who the real Jesus is. And so the historical Jesus, of course, right? The blue-eyed, blonde or light brown hair kind of European Jesus there, I can guarantee you he did not look like that. I don't know what he looked like, but I know he didn't look like that, right? You know, it's very unlikely that Jesus would have looked like that. First of all, in the first century, they were practicing cutting their hair short back then. Jews were wearing beards, Romans were not, but that was first century. They were very much into short hair. And so Jesus wouldn't have looked like that. That's more of a European style, like when that picture was drawn, right? And then that guy's just too handsome to be Jesus, right? And so, according to Isaiah. And so, finding the real Jesus is just more difficult, even when we think about not just the externals, but the internals. Like, who is he really? So let's pick up the text once again. And so, back to Mark chapter 8. And so, and it's actually in your handout, but I'm going to be reading it from New American. And so you've got your choice there. Verse 28. And they told him, saying, well, verse 27. Who do people say that I am? And they told him, saying, well, here's what people say. Some people say you're John the Baptist. Others say Elijah. And others say that you're one of the prophets. So he continued by questioning them. Who do you say that I am? And Peter answered and said, you are the Christ. And then he said these peculiar words. He warns his own disciples to tell no one about him. And then he began to teach them. So after asking them, who do people say that I am? And then, of course, asking the disciples, who do you say I am? And Peter saying, well, you're the Messiah. Jesus is like, don't tell anybody. And then he's going to teach them what he really is. And so he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly. That's English for he made it really clear and simple. I must die and then in 3 days rise again. And that's the moment that Peter takes him aside and begins to rebuke Jesus for saying such nonsense. Verse 33. But he turned away from Peter and he said to the disciples, this Peter guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but on man's interest. Then he summoned the multitude with his disciples, and he said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life shall lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's shall save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. All right, that's our text. When Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah, what did Jesus want? Why did he want them to keep it a secret? I mean, like, why does he tell them? Peter's like, you're going to be the Messiah. So here's a couple of things I want you to notice. Peter says, you are the Messiah. And 30 seconds later, what is Peter doing? He's like, Jesus, stop it. You're not right. You don't know what you're talking about. That's not the Jesus we are following. Stop that. And Jesus is like, okay, nobody listened to him. So I think that helps us understand why Jesus told them not to tell everybody. It's kind of like this, right? It's like sometimes the wrong picture is worse than no picture at all, because then it formulates this false idea and hope in people's minds that's completely false, right? You guys remember that story here recently, right? It's in Spain, and it's on the church wall, this church building wall, and over the years, of course, it was really damaged there on the left. It wasn't in bad shape, but it's starting to fade and flake off. And they hired a artist to fix it, and that was what she did. And they were like, we made a mistake in who we hired, right? And so sometimes it's like a wrong picture can be worse than no picture at all. At least before, he looked like he was human, right? and so it's like sometimes the wrong picture is like, okay, never mind, right? It's just worse than even having a picture at all. And so imagine what they are thinking about Jesus at this point. I mean, what do they see in Jesus? What do they think about him? How is Peter and the rest of the disciples, how do they see Jesus at this moment? It's like the Messiah is coming, and he's going to fight the battle for us and take out the Romans. And, what would that mean if we all heard that message? What would we expect Jesus to be doing? If I've been taught all my life the Messiah is coming and he's going to rescue us from the Romans, and I've seen the Romans, they have shields and they have little pointy things, and they've got like big armies, and they've got forts and all of that. So I think our Messiah is going to need to train us up in battle. It's going to be some of that kind of stuff. Or imagine if everyone has heard about Jesus being a miracle worker who's there to fix all your problems. What would happen? Everybody would be bringing everybody in droves, right, to come get healed, because that's what the Messiah is all about. Contrast that with learning in this text that Jesus is going to die on the cross, and suddenly the picture changes, doesn't it? It's like suddenly all this is different. So back to our thing. Who do people say that I am? Both back then and today, people have huge misconceptions and false pictures of this Jesus. So here we go. We can make our list. There's not very many of them. We'll start with this one. Misconception number one. He's here to build or restore a nation. He's here to build or restore a nation. That, of course, is a huge misconception. Jesus could really care less about the politics of today or 2,000 years ago, because he's not here to build and restore nations. If he wasn't there to build and restore the Jewish nation, what does he think about any other nation? Because that was his own people, and he didn't care about restoring the nation. It's like Jesus is like, I'm not here as that kind of Messiah. That's not what I'm about. And it's easy to get confused sometimes, because he's called the Messiah, which is the anointed one, and the anointed ones are otherwise called what? Kings. So it was easy for the Jews to misconstrue that, oh no, Jesus is going to be our king, so he's going to be anointed our king, and he's going to rescue us from the Romans. So it's possible to get the wrong idea. The Pharisees, of course, are more interested in keeping traditions and following the law to restore God's people. What are the Sadducees doing? They're working hard to maintain the status quo, to keep themselves in power. What are the Zealots doing? They're fighting to try to get back to the good old days. If we could just get back to the good old days, it'd be so awesome, like the golden age of David or Solomon, and oh, it'd be so great if we could just get back to those days. And so you've got the Zealots wishing for the good old days, the Sadducees hoping that they can stay in power, the Pharisees wishing that everybody would follow the law so that we'd get back to the good old days. And what are all of these people doing? What are they all doing in all of this? They're all looking backwards to when David was anointed king, or whoever was anointed king, and they are hoping and wishing and praying that Jesus will bring them back to that. And Jesus comes on the scene, and what does he say? I'm bringing you something new. I'm not going backwards. I'm not going to rebuild a nation. I've got something way bigger in mind than taking care of you and making sure the Romans fall. That's not what I'm here to do. God just didn't really care about rebuilding a nation. And the way he does it here very subtly in his speech, he's doing these misconceptions. Listen to the way he says it. It's back in what he's saying here in verse 31. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes. What is he saying? I'm going to be rejected by these politicians. I'm going to be rejected by these people that want me to take us back to some nation that was created hundreds of years ago. No, I'm bringing you something new. Stop looking backwards. Look forward. That's Jesus' message here. When it comes to does he really care about rebuilding a nation? No. His kingdom is about changing hearts, right? Luke 17. It's all about the hearts, right? And we saw that last week's lesson. And so today, a lot of people think the gospel is about making a Christian nation, or we need a Christian society. Don't let it go over your lips. We are not in the business of forming a Christian society. We have one business, we have one goal, we only do one thing as a church. We only do one thing as a people. You only have one job as an individual. Jesus Christ is here to only do one thing, and that is make Christians, period. If you put a Christian word as an adjective, you don't know about Christianity yet. I'm not here to develop societies. I could care less. I'm here to develop Christians, period. That's what Jesus is here saying. Do you see how he did it? And he was so forceful about it that he said, Peter, stop being Satan. That's Satan talk. When you start thinking that I'm here to do stuff about people, about society or nations or the Romans, that's just crazy talk. It's like, so anytime you use the word Christian as an adjective, you're missing the point. We're not here to form Christian societies, Christian membership, Christian groups, Christian playgrounds, Christian events, Christian, just fill in the blank, Christian people. Nope, we're here to do one thing, make Christians, period. That's what Jesus has just said. So that's at the global level. So when we start using that modifier, be careful how you're using it. You don't want to miss the point. Now, do we want a Christian society? Sure. But how am I going to get a Christian society? Making Christians, right? That's where it starts. So it's not, Christianity isn't a means to an end. It's the end. It's all there is, isn't there? Right? It's God's kingdom first and foremost. So be careful how we talk about, are we fighting the wrong war? Are we fighting with the wrong weapons? Sometimes people will talk about some of those things like, I don't know, culture war. That's not really our fight. We're not here to prop up political powers or wield political power ourselves. Our fight is to make Christians, and that happens in people's hearts. And what's the weapons that we're to use? I should put some of this up. When Christian becomes just a modifier, a Christian blank, we're misusing the word. It's not a means to an end. It's like, it's the end. The end result is Christians. They're Christians, and that's what we want, right? Just like that's what we want to be, and that's what Jesus wanted. Where do you pledge your allegiance? God's kingdom, right? That's where we pledge it first. And so these kind of thoughts about, are we fighting with the wrong weapons, right? What kind of weapons should we be fighting with? Now, if my goal is to make a Christian, whatever word you want to put next, though the weapons I'm going to use to fight that battle are going to look really different from God's weapons. Like, if Jesus was there to kick out the Romans and form a Christian nation, he's not using the right weapons. I can guarantee it. He needs to raise money. He needs to make a big army. And he needs to learn how to defeat the Romans with his super-duper powers. And they go forth and conquer. He'll kind of look like Alexander the Great. And then these big battles will take place, and he'll outwit the Romans with his smarts, and then they'll trample them to death and all that kind of great stuff. But Jesus doesn't use those weapons. And if we want to fight that battle today, it's just silly to even think about it, right? It'd be silly to think about, okay, let's raise billions of dollars and take over the newspapers, and we're going to make laws, and we'd be fighting the battle completely different than what the weapons that he uses. Love, humility, and grace, right? Changing people's hearts. And who knows? That might help the culture. Maybe, right? Hopefully. But I'm going to work on people's hearts. You're going to work on people's hearts. That's what Jesus is saying here. Consider Paul. See, the other side of this is consider how this is done. If love and humility and grace aren't suited to get me where I'm going, then maybe it's time to rethink my path. It's like if those things don't really work, and they wouldn't really work if I was here to defeat the Romans, right? If you're here to defeat the Romans, it's not really going to work. Consider Paul for a moment. Isn't he great? It's just this stuff just rolls off the page later on. It's like Peter, of course, is thinking, Jesus, you're doing this all wrong. And Paul comes along, of course, many years later. We skip over 20 years, right? We get to Acts 17, and you remember what Paul's doing? Paul's like, I'll show you how we can help this Roman Empire learn about becoming a Christian, right? How people can become Christian. And so what does he do? He gets himself thrown in jail. He takes a boat ride underneath the Roman Empire's rule. They get shipwrecked. He finally makes his way after a couple of years to Rome. He's in prison for several years. And what happens during all of that? What does Acts 17 say? Even in Caesar's household, people heard the gospel. You're like, oh, yeah, see how different that is? It's like Paul took this pathway of suffering and prison, and he said, that's what helped the gospel along. And Peter's like, don't do it, Paul. And so Jesus has something to say there about that, right? And so how did he turn the world upside down? Not with worldly power. He preached to him the gospel, right? While he's on trial for treason to possibly get murdered by them, right? It's just so different than the way Peter and the rest of these disciples are thinking. This bottom up kind of stuff, right? From a prison cell instead of top down kind of stuff that sometimes we are kind of like wistful for. Like we're almost like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we had a lot of power? Then we could really show these people. It's like, no, we really don't need to show them anything, do we? Except the suffering Paul or the suffering Christ. Misconception number 2. It doesn't just happen at a national level. Where else does it happen? It happens in the individual level, doesn't it? It's like it doesn't just happen here with power and prestige, and instead there has to be suffering and sacrifice. It also happens at like our little levels, doesn't it? Misconception number 2, he's here to meet all my needs. That's the second misconception, isn't it? It's like Jesus hits them where it hurts in this little area, right smack in the middle of the book, because he doesn't stop there. He rebuked, back up to 31, the Son of Man must suffer, be killed, and after 3 days rise again. It's like, not only am I going to be rejected by the leaders of whatever the local and the national government was at the time, but in order to do that, I've got to lose my life. I've got to suffer. I must have shame in my life. And that's the pathway. So, you notice how he's hitting both of those? He's like, who do people say that I am? And some people are like, well, you're going to raise up the nation and defeat the Romans. And others are like, you're a great miracle worker and you're meeting all of our needs. And Jesus is like, both of those are wrong. I'm here to die on a cross and be resurrected in 3 days. And so there's this Santa Claus Jesus, right, that we sometimes get. He's just here to give me stuff. The real Jesus is so much better than that, of course. Jesus is not here to give me stuff. It's like, it sounds so nice, the Santa Claus Jesus. Who doesn't want Jesus to swoop in, take away all of our illnesses, pay all of our bills, do all of the house cleaning, and everything else? It's like, yeah, we'd love for Jesus to do that. Jimmy this week helped me with this sermon. I paused for a moment, sorry. Jimmy and I went through this sermon, and at that moment right there, I said, he's the Santa Claus Jesus. And Jimmy's like, you're right. It's like, then that's Jimmy's line. Who doesn't want Jesus to swoop in and take away all of our illnesses, pay all of our bills, except he said, and do all of our homework? He's a little closer to the youth group than I am. Anyway, and I thought, do all the house cleaning? Anyway, oh, goodness. Right? It's not that he doesn't care about our immediate problems, right? He clearly does. Jesus does totally care about it, and he wants us to bring all of that to him, right? But did he come to this earth to make sure my life was easy? Yeah, see, that's the problem. That's the misconception. He didn't come to this earth to make my life easy. He came to this earth to die on a cross so that I would be reconciled with God, so that I would become a Christian. Not that I would become a life like a Christian lazy person, right? Because really that's what would happen if Jesus was the big Santa Claus, is we would all sit around doing nothing. And Jesus is like, he's just so much better than that, isn't he? He's so much bigger than we could have expected or imagined. So back to Paul again, right? I mean, just think about every crisis in Paul's ministry was used for one thing, to advance the gospel. When Peter's imprisoned or flogged or stoned or shipwrecked, it's like every junction, it's like, oh, wow, I was shipwrecked in an entire island. Here's the gospel. And if I hadn't been shipwrecked, we wouldn't even stopped at that island. It's that simple. It's like the opportunities, what will happen with opportunities that come our way? How does God use those crisis moments as opportunities? And it's a very personal thing. This isn't like, how will God use the pandemic? I'm talking more like, how will God use the crisis in your life? And are you ready for the little thing that's a big thing in your life, right? These little things in the grand scheme of things are big things when it's personal. And so, am I waiting for him just to fix everything? The conclusion. So he begins to teach them. The Son of Man must undergo suffering, be rejected, be killed, and 3 days later rise again. The most glorious most powerful moment in the history of mankind is also the most shameful, suffering moment. It's like at that moment when Jesus suffers at his most, when God himself has stooped so low as to allow himself to die the most shameful death on a cross, and the gap of that journey is so great, is the moment that he is most glorified. This is so amazing to think about. It's like, it's that moment, right? We know it from Revelation. There's lots of places that do it, though, all over Scripture, and I put a few on the back page. Like Galatians will say it, of course. Paul will do it in multiple places. But John in Revelation does the best job, right? Because he's like, why is he worthy to take the book? Well, because he's God. No, it's not because he's God. God himself would not be worthy to take this book. Why would God himself not be worthy? In his pre-incarnate form, while he's running around like God of the universe, because it's the rest of the text, right, in Revelation. Because he was slain and has purchased men by his blood. That's what makes him worthy. So it's because of the depth of this shame that he does his thing. And so it makes sense that what would he call us to do, you and I? What would he say to us? How is God going to use you? Does he want you to continue to pray for healing? Yeah, don't get me wrong here. He's a compassionate, loving Savior, and he loves each of us. But when it comes to the route of what he's about, like who he is and how he's going to do things, does it make sense that he would call us to the same kind of lesson? Like, I bet you he will. If he used Paul like that so effectively, and that's what the whole rest of the New Testament does, is give the example of these disciples like Paul living like Jesus, I have a feeling he wants us to do the same thing. That when we suffer the shame and endure our own crosses, whatever those crosses might be, of course, they're not going to be a cross like the Roman cross, but whatever the crosses might be, then I have a feeling the gospel and God receives glory today also. And suddenly we become more like Jesus. So hopefully this lesson is right in the middle of the book. It can become this pivot place. It's like, okay, everything in the rest of the book is going to rest on that one thought. And we'll hear it at least twice more. Jesus is going to, the disciples, hopefully we're a little more up to speed than disciples because they're going to have to hear it 2 more times. And even then, when he actually gets led to the cross, what are they all doing? They can't believe it. They just can't believe that Jesus would do this. They're in the garden chopping off ears, right? They just can't believe it. No way. There's no way he's going to be like this. Even after Jesus tells them plainly, whatever that word means, like how plain was he in this? So we don't want to miss the picture either of this Jesus, a little more layered, a little more nuanced now of this portrait of our Savior and what he's here to do. So he's not here to build and restore nations. He's not even here to be our Santa Claus. But he is here to save us and to help us become the Christian that he wants us to be. All right. How do you see Jesus? We're going to have one final song and say a prayer. I hope, Lord willing, the live stream sound worked this morning. And it worked in here at least. And so hopefully you've heard the lesson and we could sing together. And so thanks for coming to worship this morning. What a great God we serve. I can't help but think, I'm sorry, it's just, I can't help saying it. It's like, if Jesus was just like the way I wanted him, he would be a really poor Jesus, wouldn't he? Because I'm just not, I can't think, right? The portrait I could create in my own mind wouldn't do him justice or service or be anything that we would want to actually follow over thousands of years. So what a great, wise God we have to give us Jesus. Let's stand and sing.